Welcome back. This is your host, Kristi Slaughter, on SuperTalk Saturday mornings. I'm joined with my special guest, Frank Hydahl and Dawn Shiner. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all for joining us by phone from Floyd, Virginia. Frank, you are known as the Green Wood Wizard, so I'm glad that you've joined us so that you can talk to us about this unique work of art that you're creating. Really, there's no one else in the world doing this. Is that right?
Well, so far as I know, I mean, it's quite possible there are other people doing it, but we haven't been able to find any on the internet or anything like that. So,
And there's the arbor sculpture, tree shaping movement, and I think they're aware of what we're doing, but we haven't really It's very individualized and international.
yeah, I should say there is a whole art form of transforming the shape of living wood into some object or artwork or thing beyond what a tree would normally grow as. So that's and it's been called arbor sculpture, which some people think maybe should refer just to trees grown into a shape to be a living sculpture. Like there's people that grow trees into the shape of people.
Or benches.
Grow benches out of it, which is...
Someone's growing a boat. People have grown even coat hangers. I mean, it's pretty odd. We didn't know this, really, when we began. We didn't know how extensive it really was, and yet how small.
Yeah, I almost, thought I was the only person to ever have thought of anything even like this, but actually it turns out it's sort of an ancient art, too. There's been people in the past that have done it, and it's suspected that even ancient people did it. There's pictures of things that look like they must have been grown from, but of course they're drawings, so you don't know whether it's what it is, but for sure it looks like people actually anciently grew chairs and things on purpose out of trees.
And then there's the old bridges in the southern part of the world that were discovered by these that were made of roots and doing the same thing. So it's a collaboration with trees, a biological collaboration. And Frank got hit by the passion. Or he knew it.
And how did that begin, Frank? When did your love affair with trees begin?
Well, I think my love affair with trees really began as a child, and trying to understand how they grew and stuff, because of experiences in my childhood of like a horseshoe caught in a tree that had grown partly into it, and my brother explaining to me how that worked. And it sort of sparked a passion in finding out how things worked in general, and trees always interested me. But along about in my early 20s, maybe late teens, a brother of mine and I were sitting around talking about this and that, and the subject somehow came up of shipbuilding and how they used trees bent into a special shape for the keels and stuff, so that they didn't have to try. You couldn't bend that massive a piece of wood, and you couldn't easily fabricate it. So if you had a tree that grew with a bend in it, then you could have that bend in the keel of the ship. And we kind of speculated if people actually did that on purpose, or could you? And then went from there to thinking about other things you could do. And my eventual thought was to grow a whole house that way, which I never got around to doing in all these years, but I've experimented with it some. But at some point, how many years ago, Don, when I first started the ring stuff?
Oh, he was doing carpentry, and he just came home, and I can't do it anymore. And he was already starting to try tying trees in the yard, and I didn't even know about it. Actually, I'd come upon them even on the edges of the garden, and I'd prune them out and then realize what I had done in the beginning. But he just got to a point where he went into the science. I mean, his passion was like, okay, how do I take this and do something with my passion for trees, because tearing them apart and then pounding them back together and sawing them is not what I want to do. And so he spent time, and I think it was 2003, he actually started tying and doing, just reading biology and all the science he could get hold of and researching on the computer at the same time as trying things all over the yard.
And I actually thought about a whole bunch of different things to try to do something that I could actually realistically within my lifetime make money at doing, because I sort of needed to do that too, having given up doing anything else. And so the rings kind of came up as one of the, because we don't have an awful lot of space, I thought of growing furniture and stuff too. But the rings seemed to be the thing that really just appealed to me on some level, and it just seemed to have a significance, and it seemed to me other people would be willing to pay for such a thing if I grew it.
Very practical, realizing he had just dropped out of a livelihood. We were aiming, but we had no idea, none whatsoever. And so I think about him as the midwife for our sons, and I think about him midwifing this whole thing, and it was so experiential and so deep, and so like losing him to the trees for a while, and then he came back. But we didn't know what the trees were going to gift us with in the end. I mean, it was all research. We're putting up a website where we can actually show the very first rings, which you couldn't wear, but they're objects of art, and they should at least be seen. And I just think that the way that it came out was just something that was a gift of the trees, and I really want to express that we're a collaboration. We couldn't do this without the trees. Otherwise, we'd be carving rings, and we're not carving rings. We're grafting and then carving what the tree reveals. So, anyway, my piece there.
Yeah, I do occasionally have an idea of carving a ring into something, but mostly I just try to follow what the ring needs to be carved into a ring. And some of my rings I don't hardly do any carving on at all. I just, of course, I have to cut off the twig ends,
which is pruning,
where it's part of the tree, which is just pruning of the tree. And actually, a lot of the rings that I harvest are on branches that the tree would eventually drop normally anyways. So, but of course I end up doing enough rings on a small tree that I keep the tree small, and it tends to bush out and produces more rings over the years until eventually it gets away from me, and I have to cut it down further maybe. I don't know how long I can go on with that with the tree, but I suspect for as long as I want. Going by the evidence of bonsai, where they have trees that actually seem to last longer than a normal tree would, simply by really radical pruning of the tree.
Frank,
somehow this is sustainable too.
Right. You're taking care of the tree itself. What are some of the trees that you use for your arbor sculpting for these rings?
Well, let's see. I've used the oaks and maples and cherries are probably some of the main ones I use, and dogwood. I've tied on a lot of other trees that we have around. I have a mulberry tree I've tied on, and a ginkgo I've tied on. Got a few rings going on chestnut, and some on black locust, which is a pretty hard one to do on. one of the ones I've grown on just for the challenge of doing it, because just to show it was possible.
These are so
Ash,
beautiful.
Turned out to be surprisingly difficult to do. I thought it would be an easy one, but just depends on finding twigs that are limber enough and small enough to do the first forming of the ring. Hickory I've tied on. That's another fairly difficult one.
Frank,
there's probably more, but
Sweet
birch, yeah.
And each ring is specifically unique. And how long does it just depend on the growing season of the tree, how fast it grows?
Right. There's actually a lot of variables. Of course, it varies some by species, but even more so, it varies by where the branch on the tree is that you tie on. In other words, trees, when they normally grow, they put most of their growth into whatever is closest to the top of the tree, and the branches further down on the tree mainly just feed the top of the tree. They don't, or the roots. They don't feed themselves very much, so consequently they don't grow very much. Which is good in a sense for growing rings on them, because then the rings grow more slowly, and more slowly growing wood is a bit denser, so it makes a better ring in a sense. On the other hand, it does take longer to grow, and some of the rings I've grown have taken over 6 years to finish.
Oh, but they're beautiful.
It's growing, but I've also had rings that will grow in 1 year when it's like on the top of the tree and it's a fast-growing part of the tree, like on a cherry or something.
A lot of people are using these as engagement rings.
Yes. It's, engagement and wedding rings seems to be the main thing people are getting them for, or engagement rings that they then use as their wedding rings too.
Oh yes, it's interesting because where we are in reaching out to people, it's like we have drawn so many sweet people, not only to feasting at our house on putting rings on, but through the internet as well. And it's amazing how they have no problem taking and putting this ring on their darling right then and there, and they've already proposed, obviously, but they didn't have a ring, and then they get the ring, and they take it off on the wedding day and just put it back on, and that way they've got something that captures the whole experience of their commitment. And it's like, I never thought of it that way, and we never expected we'd even end up selling wedding rings, but the first 2 rings we sold were wedding rings.
It's an unexpected benefit in a sense, because it really sort of inspires me, and it feels like a natural part of the whole thing, that this union between 2 people and the union of us with the trees and the whole ecology of things is sort of expressed there. It's a nice way to look at things.
We need to take a quick commercial break. Can you all stay with us for a few minutes? I've got some questions. I had pulled up your Etsy page, and I was looking at all the different types of rings and the different woods, and some of them have some interesting things in them, like freshwater pearl. So I'd like for you to talk to me a little bit about how you do that. Can you all stay with us for a minute?
Oh, please. Thank you.
We'll be back here in just a moment. This is your host, Kristi Slaughter, on SuperTalk Saturday mornings, WFHG. Good morning. This is your host, Kristi Slaughter. I'm joined with my special guest, Frank Hydahl and Dawn Shiner. They are husband and wife and owners of the Green Wood Wizard. Thank you all for staying with us.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us on.
Before the commercial break, I had a question about some of these rings that have inlays, or I don't even know, grown around certain things like freshwater pearls. How do you go about doing something like that?
Right. We call that an inclusion, because that's what actually it's technically called in we study the biology of wood. Mostly in reference to bark gets included in a tree once in a while, that is grown in under the surface of the wood. And what I do is I carve a little depression in the top of the ring and put in mostly freshwater pearls I've done so far. And then I have a little jig and whatnot that I use to hold it in there, because the natural tendency of the tree is to want to grow under anything it can grow under and push it out. So I have to hold it in there pretty well, but once it can't grow underneath it, it starts to grow up around it, and it sort of makes its own natural setting for the pearl, a solid piece of the ring.
Folks, has there been any ring that has been created by you and this marriage of the trees itself that you finished and just thought, okay, this one we're not going to sell it. We want to keep this.
Yeah, there's been a couple of those.
One that has a face that looks like the way that the ends of the grain came out look like 2 wizards on the face of the ring. We're not letting that one go. Not that it's our size. I mean, we don't dictate the size. That's determined to the best size afterwards. And I mean, when Frank's tying the rings, he can get them close to certain sizes, but the final carving is what determines the size. So some of the rings that we actually like the most aren't in our sizes. So they are collector items, yes. And the American chestnuts at this point too. We have two that we've given to the American Chestnut Foundation with the help of Heartwood. Where in Abington we have a display where we're juried into the center down there, and these two rings, hopefully the American Chestnut Foundation will use as a fundraiser. They're wearable, but they're for special occasions because they weren't fully grafted. After we gave them those rings, we succeeded in white man, Frank succeeded in grafting American chestnut rings, fully grafting. He's got two now. And so we'll either, if we sell them, the funds will go to the American Chestnut Foundation, and we're actually about to contact them with the new rings and ask them what they would prefer. So we're pretty excited at what he's been able to do and the collaboration he's been able to manifest. He's using like the shoots that are coming up from the American chestnut. And it's almost like they're staying longer to finish a ring now that they know what he's doing. It's...
Yeah, I consider it as a way to sort of allow the chestnuts to make some money for themselves to help a foundation that perhaps will help the trees to survive into the future and become what they once were, maybe once again.
That's such a neat story. Now, I'm wondering, Frank and Dawn, once you've got these set up, how often do you visit them to check them out? Is this a daily thing? Are we walking around the woods several times a day? Is it you don't visit them for a month? How does that work?
Some do get lost, but let Frank go on this one.
Well, it's fairly daily, but I mean, I don't pay as much attention, say, in the wintertime. I don't have to look at them so much. Right now, it should be daily. I do skip days here and there, but yeah, I have to be out looking at things because right now things are growing, and it's right at the point where I have to tie when the twig is at the right point. There's often only a small window of, say, less than a week where it's really right to tie on a particular branch.
And I'm sure you all talk to the trees.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
But not in English. You have to speak their language.
Do we want to do that on the show today, or are we just going to let that be? That's the insider tour?
It's just like a communion that's developed with a process, and that, as I see it, Frank himself has become softer. I mean, he always was a gentle person, but it's like a softness that has come over him that's in this collaboration with trees. And I often used to joke that, really I was a widow and he'd married the trees, And then I see in Native American mythology, there's actually stories about things like that, and I'm like, no way, you don't get them. But he's out there a lot. He is. If he's not making the armatures to tie the rings around, if he's not tying something, he's checking something. And the whole grove, he's on edges which grow prolifically, and so he's managing the edging, the ground covers as well, and keeping the canopy back on things also is important. So there's a lot of work that goes into it, but we do take holidays. Yes, we do.
If people want to learn more information about these beautiful rings, the Green Wood Wizard, where can they go to find that?
Well, if they want to go to the website, the About section is fairly complete. We're redoing our website's down, and we're redoing that to make it so it reflects more of what we're doing actually, and keeping the sales on Etsy, but to be able to maybe put some special things up for sale on the website, but really to share what we're doing and hoping that other people will value this, because the sustainability of managing this is something that if we can value the trees, maybe we'll realize how important they are for our environment. They are everything to our environment. And when we cut them down, and we're seeing so much of that here on the ridge, and right here on the ridge is where the American chestnuts were. I mean, it was people were living off of the American chestnuts, literally, not only eating them, but selling them down in Roanoke, which is down in a valley from the ridge here. So, it's like I feel like a lot of this is we're in an awkward economic situation because we don't want to value what our trees are doing to outprice other things, even if it's the only thing that's happening like it in the world at this point, because we see how important it is to share the energy and how appreciative people are of the rings and how many people come back and talk to us about their experiences. And oh my gosh, it's like extending a family out of trees. And they come and they tour the grove where they're grown. And I don't know, there's something really special going on that's almost metaphysical at this point. And yet at the same time, hey, we're very grounded. We're very grounded on the land, and we're grounded with our family and grandchildren, and we just are very grateful for the trees giving us something that hopefully will support us in our retirement. And if we can find other carvers, we're ready for other people who would like to take on some of the rings that we don't have time to carve, and collaborative, make it a collaborative from the trees to humans instead of mostly just Frank. I mean, I do the internet and the publicity and connect with Heartwood and Abington. And
yes, you wanted to tell about Heartwood. We have the rings there.
Oh, right. Places to see the ring, because your question, and I get onto the story. But at Heartwood in Abington, their center has 5 of our rings, and they go across the gamut in styles. And then at Chick's Antiques, we have a little display, small display here in Floyd. It's kind of an emporium more than just antiques, but it's got everything and 3 floors of it. And he's let us put a display in there so people can even see some of the more eclectic things like the gastropods, the snails and the snake, and a couple other things that we probably wouldn't sell. Oh, and a wand. He tried inclusions all along a wand of just beads just to see if it would work, and then he put a fingernail on the end. It's just fun to look at. And so we hope people really get the idea that this is something that we would like to have other people replicate with us, and we're willing to share all the information on how to do it and collaborate, even right through sales, and push this something so that we don't mine diamonds and we don't have people dying because of gold and silver. So we've become more political, I think, because of the trees when we see the sustainability factor of the whole world at this point and what's going on to people and my gosh, the children. So something in honor of what here sustains us. Thank you for letting us even talk about our tree rings.
Well, thank you all for being on the show today, sharing your story with us and all the work that you're doing for sustainability and art and joy and beauty. I really appreciate it. I'm going to put the links up and things so that people can find out more information about your beautiful rings. I can't wait to come and tour it if I can do that. I think I might have just invited myself, but I would love to see
share it with you. We promise we always have treats too.
Oh, good. Yes. You heard us talking this morning, I think. Well, thank you.
Yeah, by appointment. We do it by appointment, and that way it works.
That sounds
And we've had
great.
people come from Michigan University even and all of a sudden look at us and say sustainable forestry, whereas Virginia Tech doesn't seem to want to say that. So we're trying to get the word out, and we thank you so much for sharing with us.
Well, you're welcome. We hope you all have a wonderful Saturday. Thanks again, and much love up to Floyd, Virginia. Very good. We'll be back here in just a minute. This is your host, Kristi Slaughter.